Hello, today we're going to give you 79 to 86 guys some love and show how easy it is to install a Dakota Digital VHX dash into Scott's 1986 Mustang LX with a healthy, naturally aspirated 427. Using the Newrad Solutions Digital EZ harness kit, no need to splice into your OEM wiring. Retire your stock gauges and update them with a modern look with accurate gauges and tons of features of a digital dash. The Digital EZ harness kit makes the wiring so easy you won't have to trace a single wire color. Just follow the wiring table and put your wiring anxiety aside, making this an easy DIY project. Although we are showing a Dakota Digital install, the Digital EZ harness kit does work with other gauge kits such as the Holley Pro, New Vintage USA, Autometer Invision, Intellitronics, and others. For those gauge systems, you likely want the short version of this kit. The steps in this video are being done in a specific order to be the most efficient after doing many of these installs. All of the accessories mentioned in this video are available on the Newrad Solutions website. With the Digital EZ harness kit, you'll simply snap the connectors onto the OEM dash connectors and route the wires to the control box and plug in the wires. It's really that simple. The kit provides everything you need to install the dash, but you may want some extra zip ties, tape, perhaps a marker for labeling, wire strippers, a pair of wire cutters, and an electronic size screwdriver. Let's begin. First, remove the negative battery terminal. Now with the car on a lifter jack stands, remove the speedometer cable from the transmission. Doing this provides slack in the cable, making it easier to pull out the gauge cluster. Remove the speedometer gear from the old cable and put it on the supplied sender and install it back into the transmission. In our case, we are using a GPS, so we will leave the supplied sender in the transmission, but we will not hook up the supplied cable. If not using GPS, you will use the supplied cable and run it inside the vehicle to your VHX control box location, and then follow the quick start guide on the color-coded control box. Moving inside the car, remove the screws to the gauge bezel and set aside. Remove the plastic surround of the steering column. The screws are accessed from below. Remove the 4 screws that retain the stock gauge cluster. Pull out the cluster and remove the lower left light bulb to get better access to the left rear connector. This is what the back of the cluster looks like to help orient you to the location of the connectors on the back of the cluster. Remove both left and right connectors from the rear of the cluster. Remove the speedometer cable from the rear of the cluster. Here's a tip. Push the speedometer cable towards you first, depress the white tab, and then pull the cable away from you from the cluster. If you plan to use the vehicle mileage, record that mileage now. Remove the speedometer cable from the vehicle, noting that ours has been previously cut, but keep the firewall grommet. Next, drain about 1/2 to 3/4 of a gallon of coolant from the radiator. If your radiator petcock is seized, use a budget hand pump to remove coolant from the radiator cap. Remove the OEM water temperature sender from the top of the intake. Match up the supplied hardware and use thread tape on the portion that goes into the intake. It's not recommended to put thread tape on the water sender as it could impact the reading due to higher resistance. Yep, that's right, don't do what we did. Now install the new water sender, being sure not to over tighten as it is soft brass and can shear off. You can refill the radiator, but you will need to start and run the car up to temperature to work out any air pockets and top it off, which can be done at the end of the install. Remove the wire from the top of the oil sender and unscrew the sender from the extender piece on the driver's side engine behind the power steering pump. Using the supplied brass hardware, find the one that fits, use thread tape, and install into the OEM sender location. Next, use thread tape and install the new oil sender, being sure not to over tighten. If you want to leave the OEM sender intact, or if you have a supercharger or turbo that you want to supply oil to without affecting the oil sender, consider using the Glow Shift oil filter sandwich, which only takes a couple minutes to install and gives you several added oil sender location options. Route the supplied oil and water sender cables through the same hole you removed the speedometer cable. You can reuse the grommet that was previously on the speedometer cable and place it back in the firewall around the sender wires. We decided to cover our sender wires with braided loam for appearance, but this is not required as the sender cables are already jacketed. Plug in the oil and water sender connectors. You can't mix them up as they will only go on one way. Follow the Dakota Digital Quick Start Guide and plug the sender wires into the color-coded inputs on the control box. We are now done underneath the car. Remove the radio and remove the center console of the vehicle. In our case, we will be mounting the control box and the GPS box behind the radio. Now moving over to a workbench, you will smooth out the back of the OEM bezel with sandpaper or Dremel tool so it will sit flush when installed with the Dakota gauge cluster. For the warning panel lights, remove some of the plastic and then using epoxy install the supplied blank-off plate provided by Dakota Digital. Set this aside and allow the epoxy to cure. So it's important to note that on 79 to 86 Mustangs, you're going to need to decide whether to use the turn signal lights in their stock location or use the directional lights that are based inside the gauge face of the VHX dash. If you do choose this option, do not cover the turn signal wires into the harness loom. Leave them out, as these wires will not go to the control box. If you want to use the stock turn signal locations, you will wire the supplied white with green stripe wires to the respective right and left turn signal wires of the Digital EZ harness. The white with black wires will be tied to ground, and you will plug the connectors into the back of the VHX gauge cluster. If you want to use the VHX gauge cluster turn signal lights, you will simply wire the Digital EZ harness turn signal wires to the appropriate locations on the VHX control box. Using the Digital EZ harness kit, cut the supplied heat shrink so you have 4 equal length pieces. Install 2 of the pieces over the wires up near the connectors, then install the braided loom, then apply heat to shrink tubing to cover the ends of the loom. The harness wires will come pre-labeled with left and right and by pin number. We are using the Newrad Solutions ferrule kit to upgrade the wire ends to give a little dress up to our harness, but it's not required. The ferrules do help secure the wires in the control box, and it does prevent stray wires. Using the diagram as shown here, and I'll pause for a second, which you can print out in the appendix of the instructions, strip or use ferrules for each of the numbered wires that will be inserted into the control box. Use the supplied small heat shrink tubing to cover the ends of any unused wire. You will only need about a ½ inch of heat shrink per wire to cover the bare ends. Now, as a reminder, in case you haven't done so already, make sure you disconnect the negative battery cable, as we will be running the harness in the dash and we don't want live wires to touch each other. Now run the left harness through the dash and down towards the floorboard, then connect the Digital EZ harness connector to the OEM dash connector. Now we're going to repeat and do the same for the other side. Run the supplied Cat 5 cable behind the dash, then connect the cable to the back of the new gauge cluster and reinstall the cluster using the factory hardware. Locate the wire labeled ground and strip and crimp on the supplied ring terminal on the end farthest from the label. Strip or use a ferrule for the end closest to the wire label. That's the end that will go into the control box. Drill a new hole on clean metal under the dash and using the supplied number 10 screw, attach the crimp ring terminal to the ground connection. Dash manufacturers do recommend a clean chassis ground. The other end of the wire will go to the control box as previously mentioned. Now install the Dakota supplied switch using screws to a location of your choice. Here's where we decided to place it. Wire the switch following the Dakota Quick Start Guide. Using the wire labeled constant power, strip or use a ferrule to the constant power terminal on the control box. Strip and install the supplied spade crimp connector on the other end. Locate the fuse panel and remove and install the fuse tap on the fuse labeled horn/cigar lighter. Install the spade connector onto the fuse tap and reinstall the fuse. Now, if you are using GPS, you can easily wire it as shown. A major advantage of using GPS is changing tires and rear gears with no impact to your speedometer. GPS simply doesn't care. Now connect the Dakota GPS BIM cable between the module and the control box. This wire supplies your ground to the GPS BIM module, so you won't need an external ground to the GPS box. The constant power wire and the GPS power wire that is included in the Digital EZ harness kit will share the same constant power terminal of the VHX control box. Using the same constant power location, you can use a blue ferrule to connect both of them together or twist them together if you're just using bare wire. It's really that simple to wire the GPS with our kit. Now, it's important to mount the GPS box to a secure location that won't move while driving, because the calibration is based on the orientation of the box. There's an accelerometer inside, and when you do the calibration, it wants the orientation of that box to remain constant. For the optional GPS antenna, we routed it behind the glove box and towards the lower right-hand corner of the windshield. There is enough of a gap on the trim to guide the wire to the windshield. You don't necessarily need to drill a hole into the interior plastic. Now, for the remaining wires on the harness, use the wiring table to match the corresponding label on the Digital EZ harness. Now, with all the appropriate inputs connected to the control box, including your power and ground, you can reconnect the negative battery cable. Start by turning the key from the off to the run position and test the dash. Make sure it powers up. Check your turn signals, high beams. You can now start the car and validate that the tach and oil pressure gauge are working. At this point, you can reinstall the steering column plastic cover and gauge bezel, and you can also reinstall your radio and center console. So now we need to set up our new Dakota Digital Dash. We're going to start with the key in the off position, and then while depressing switch 1, we will turn the key to the run position. Now you can toggle through the menus using switch 1, pressing and holding through each of the menus as needed. Now for the 79 to 86 Mustang, the proper fuel sender selection will be F10, which is 73 to 10 ohms. Now for the odometer. The odometer comes at 0 miles. It can be left that way as it comes from the factory, or you can toggle through each odometer digit to replicate the mileage of your OEM cluster. You have up to 100 miles to change your mind, and then it's locked. Now, with Scott's 427 being a fairly new build, he estimated and wanted to set it at 1,000 miles, which is what we did. Now to set up the GPS speed input with the key in the off position, depress the button on the GPS bin box, then turn the key to run. Release the switch. Now press and release the switch until SNR is displayed. Now press and hold the switch until a minus sign is displayed. Press and release the switch until the letter N is displayed. This is the number of satellites being used and should be tracking about 6 satellites. If it's less than 6, you can wait a few minutes and maybe pick up more satellites. Now press and release the switch until H is displayed. The signal strength is displayed, and if needed, you should try other locations for a reading of 40 or higher. At this point, you've pretty much set up the GPS. Next, you'll want to set up the accelerometer calibration by driving the vehicle. Need to accelerate to about 10 miles per hour, and then you can decelerate, do that a couple times, and at this point your speedometer is set up and you're ready to go. Now if you're using the supplied speed sender and cable from Dakota Digital, simply follow their instructions for the measured mild calibration. So congratulations to Scott for a successful installation of his Dakota Digital VHX Dash into his Foxbody Mustang. Be sure to check us out on Newrad Solutions website and social media pages as we continue to roll out more vehicle kits and accessories to help you with your aftermarket gauge installation. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you in a future install.